Welcome to Road to Recovery.
Hello and welcome to Road to Recovery, advocacy and insights for trucking accidents with Sagi Shaked. Sagi is founder of Shaked Law Personal Injury Lawyers and is ranked as one of the top 100 trial lawyers in the United States by the American Trial Lawyers Association. With a wealth of experience in personal injury, wrongful death, and complex litigation cases, he passionately advocates for victims and has recovered multi-million-dollar settlements in damages for his clients. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode, we're going to talk about how much your trucking accident might be worth, the truth about calculating your claim. Sagi, how's it going?
Very good. Thanks for having me, Kevin.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for being here. Well, let's start out here. What factors determine the value of a truck accident case?
Yeah, so there's several factors when you think about valuing a trucking accident case, because a lot of times clients will call us and, well, not a lot of times, all the time. They call us and they want to know what's the value of my case. So if someone ever tells you right off the bat, the moment you call without knowing much about your case or gives you a value, that's a lie. Don't listen to them. They don't know what they're doing. Yeah, you really can't, because in every case, I want to know a couple of things. I want to know who's at fault, how much are they at fault. Then we talk about causation. Are the injuries from this crash or from something else? Then we talk about the damages, the injuries. How bad are the injuries? How interfering are the injuries? What are the lifelong or life-altering injuries? And then we look to how much insurance is there on the case. So if you have a case like UPS or FedEx or Amazon, you don't have to worry about the amount of insurance. They're worth billions of dollars, and you can get your fair compensation for the case. But if you have a case where you're dealing with like a mom and pop type of trucking company, they only have one truck and you don't have a broker involved, then that's a different type of case, because there may only be either $750,000 or $1 million in insurance. So a couple things to consider when doing that. So when you're thinking about the value of a case, we talk about the injuries, the medical bills, the lost wages, the loss of future income, the past pain and suffering, the future pain and suffering, the future mental anguish. Those are all things that go into it. So when someone asks me how much their case is worth, I'd like to put all those pieces of the puzzle together and then come to a number with them, not just throw them a number like you see some lawyers doing just to grab the case. You really have to be fair and, honest with the clients and tell them, hey, we're going to work this out. We're going to look through the full value of the case, and then we're going to talk about numbers. So you don't want to just throw numbers out there right away.
Yeah, let's go over those things you mentioned and start with medical bills. How are they calculated into the total value of a claim?
So medical bills, like if we go to, let's say you go to a trial, we'll do a trial, then we'll do a settlement. If you're in trial, there's always going to be a line after. So the first line will be, was there negligence on the part of the defendant that was a legal cause of injury? And if they check yes, then the next line on the verdict form will be, well, there'll be some other lines, but then eventually you'll get to the question on the verdict form. What is the amount for medical bills in the past? And then what is the amount for medical bills in the future? Now, to prove that, you really have to have your client talking about how much they've incurred in medical bills. And you'd like to have the doctors or the medical providers talking about, yes, they were in the hospital for 3-4 days or however many days, and the medical bills totaled X, whatever they totaled. And then all the other medical providers that the person treated with, and that's how you would come to your past medical bills. And then there's also future medical bills. So if a person needs future care, because remember, you're involved in this collision, you didn't ask to be hurt, and now you have to have future medical care after your case is settled. Maybe you need a surgery in the future or you need lifetime care. That shouldn't be borne upon you. It should be the insurance company and the trucking company that's paying for that. So that's a form of compensation that you're entitled to. So those are things that you should be thinking about. How much care do you need in the future? And a lot of times people don't know. And that's why you go to a lawyer, because the lawyer has to act as a forensic. We got to look into the future, which means we have to hire the right people to get the person the fair compensation for the future, not just their pain and suffering, but medical bills into the future, the amount of care they're going to need, the amount of treatment they're going to need. And it really depends on the type of injury they have. The more severe injuries require more care. The less severe injuries require less care. but they're equally valuable. Every case is important.
Okay, what about the lost income earning capacity? How does that play into determining compensation?
Yeah, it's another great question. So lost income and earning capacity, two different things. So number one, let's say a person couldn't work for a couple of months. You would have that as lost income, or a year or less than a year. It just depends on how much time they missed from work. You would have that as a component. So first you would have your medical bills we talked about, then your future medical bills, then you have your lost income. How much did you actually lose? I used to work 40 hours a week. I got paid $100 a day. And for the last 6 months, I haven't been able to work. That's going to be the amount. Now, the other one you asked about was loss of future income, right? So you could have your past income, but now you may have loss of future income. And this is really dependent on case by case. So you may have a case where a person can never work ever again in that field. Like, let's say, we had a doctor who got injured and he had a brain injury and couldn't be a doctor anymore. Maybe he could work some other fields, but he couldn't be a doctor. And so we would look at how much did the doctor make, how much was it per year, and then we would multiply it times the amount the doctor would work. If she would work until she's 65, then we would have that from 40 to 65. That would be 25 years of income times however much the doctor made. So that would be the loss of future income. And of course, the defense would fight that. They would say, oh, wow, she's not a doctor. She can go work somewhere else. That could be true, but they'd have to prove that she could work somewhere else. And it really depends on the injury, right? You could have someone who's, for example, in construction work, and they've injured their body so bad or their back or legs, and maybe they got a leg amputated and they can't work anymore in construction. Well, you've got to pay them for that because nobody asked to be put into that position. So lost income is one thing, loss of future earning capacity, that's another thing to be calculated on.
Yeah, and in your doctor scenario too, I mean, the amount of schooling and studying and residency and all the work that goes into that, and then all of a sudden you can't do that anymore. Sure, you could maybe get another job, but not what was your life's work.
Right. And that's someone's passion. And,
Right.
Some people studied, like you said, all that schooling, and then suddenly you can't do it anymore. So the loss of future earning capacity, that's one component, right? And then there's other components too, where you talk about the mental side of things, of having your passion taken away from you and what you love to do. So those are different areas of compensation.
Would that fall into what my next question would be, which would be pain and suffering? Would it go into that?
Yeah, so we use the terms pain and suffering, but there's much more than just pain and suffering. So pain is different than suffering. Someone can be in pain, doesn't mean that they're suffering. Two different things. So you have pain is one component, suffering is another component. There's another component called mental anguish. So you have people, and that's different than pain. Someone can have mental anguish and they're not in pain, right? Let's use the doctor example, and it doesn't have to be a doctor, but let's say the doctor who's studied their whole life from the moment they were in junior high school, they get good grades, and then go to undergrad, and then go to medical school, and then residency, like you said, and now that their passion is taken away from them. Or you can have someone who's a computer engineer who loved to do it and now can't do it because of the injury, let's say, to their brain or something. And so that passion was taken away. That causes mental anguish, something that you wanted to do your whole life and were doing, and suddenly you can't do it anymore. That's mental anguish. So not necessarily pain, not necessarily suffering, but it's mental anguish. You also have another component that we look for is disfigurement. A lot of times, again, depending on the injury, right? Some clients we've had who've had amputations, who've had really bad facial injuries or burns, that falls under disfigurement. Again, that's not pain. That would be suffering, and it's not mental anguish. Those are different components. The disfiguring can cause mental anguish, but that's a separate component for compensation than the pain aspect. Let's say someone got burned, for example. There's pain involved in the initial burn. There's the suffering that they go through every time they have to get those wounds taken care of. That's suffering, right? There's the mental anguish of knowing that the person, let's say if their face is burned, they have to deal with that every time they go anywhere. There's mental anguish there. And then there's the disfigurement. So while it all sounds the same, those are all different components because it hits the person differently. Every single person gets hit differently. And then we look at what is in the past and then what's in the future, right? So we have both past pain, past suffering, past disfigurement, future disfigurement, past mental anguish, and future mental anguish. How much longer are they going to have to deal with this? So someone who has a burn on their face, every single day, people are going to be looking at them differently, or if they have a scar on their face or a scar on their body. It's different to that person than it is with someone who doesn't have that, who's got to live through that on a daily basis. So those are things that we consider. So, going back, we look at the medical bills, the future medical bills, the lost wages, the future loss of earning capacity, your past pain, your future pain, your past suffering, your future suffering, your past mental anguish, your future mental anguish, disfigurement, your inconvenience. And then also important is the loss of enjoyment of life. So loss of enjoyment of life is different than pain, right? Someone experiences pain, but the loss of enjoyment of life where we'll take someone who has a child and they can't pick up their child anymore because they've been hurt so badly, or they can't even have a conversation with their child because their brain has been messed up so badly from a crash. Those are things we take into consideration. And that's why I say when you ask someone at the outset, what's the case worth? Unless we know a lot of facts at the beginning of the case, it's hard for a lawyer to really say the exact value. That's why I think when we get some of the facts, we can get a better understanding of what the case is. And then, I can tell you, this is what I think this type of case should resolve for. And I always look at it like this. If that were to happen to me, what would I want as fair compensation? And that's how I treat every client. So I don't let the insurance companies, take advantage of my clients, or I don't treat it like it's, regular, attorneys that advertise all day long and they just have to meet the monthly advertising expense and got to settle cases really fast so they can meet their advertising expense. I don't care. We don't advertise. So we'll wait the course and get to trial if we have to get you that fair and full compensation. And that's what the lawyer should be doing. It shouldn't be about, hey, we have to pay our advertising expense. Let's get full compensation for our clients, full pain, full suffering, full mental anguish, past and future, full disfigurement, depending on the case. That's how I look at it.
That's really cool. I think it's a great way to look at it. What is the difference between economic and non-economic damages in a trucking accident case?
So yeah, you hear this in trucking accidents and in regular accidents, economic versus non-economic. Economic, we'll do it very simple. Something that we can easily put it in a formula, or something that you could look at. We know the medical bills are $100,000 in the past. Those are economic. The past wages, we know they were $20,000. Those are economic. Future wages, economic. Future medical bills, economic. Now, something that's non-economic, something that you can't necessarily, there's no exact formula on how to figure out the non-economic damages. Again, for economic, we know the medical bills are $100,000. That's what it's going to be. There's no puffery there. The medical bills are the medical bills. But for non-economic, how do you measure pain? How do you measure someone's suffering? So we don't do it like in some countries. They have what's called the Code of Hammurabi. You ever heard of that, Kevin? The Code of Hammurabi?
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, the eye for an eye. So you take out my eye, I'm going to take out your eye. So we don't do that in Florida. We don't do that anywhere in the United States, but we don't do that in our country. And so we can't, like, you hurt me, I'm going to go hurt you. We don't do the vigilante justice. We just don't do that. So then how do you figure out what the value of a case is, right? How do you figure out what someone's pain and suffering is? So what I like to do is how do we communicate that to a jury? And how do we communicate that to an adjuster? The powers that be, meaning the people who are the money deciders. If you're in trial, it's the jury. But if you're not in trial, it's the adjusters. You've got to show them the injury. You've got to bring it to life. And then you've got to talk about the injury, right? And the best way to do it, which the courts don't allow us to do, I'd love to do, is say, how much would you want if it happened to you? They call that the golden rule argument. So when people think of the golden rule, it's different than what you think of when you watch Aladdin. I used to watch that with the kids, and you'd be the he who has the gold makes the rules. It's not the way it works in the courtroom. Here, the golden rule says you can't ask the jury to put them in the shoes of your client, because why? That argument is just too powerful. And because it's too powerful, the defense industry has somehow convinced the courts that we shouldn't be able to make that argument. So we have different ways of making the arguments and showing the jury what the client went through and how much you can compensate them. So every case is different. And what I would do on one case, I wouldn't do on another case, or how I would prove one case, I would prove not necessarily the next case, because every client is different. Every injury is different. While they both have maybe, let's say, back surgery, it affects everybody differently. Everybody's different. So we treat every case independently on its own. And how much that value of the case is will really depend on the case. But again, I always look at it, if this happened to me, this is what I'm going to want. And it's always going to be a lot of money, because it's not fair that you have to go through this. And so that's how I treat my clients. Well, we never settle for less, and neither should the clients settle for less.
Can you explain shared fault or comparative negligence and how that affects the value of a case?
Yeah, that's, comparative fault, what used to be the law in Florida. So there's comparative fault, which we call pure comparative. And that means, let's say you get into a crash in a trucking accident or any type of scenario, and you're found to be 60% at fault. You should still get 40% of the recovery. And you would get that in a pure comparative state, like Florida used to be before March 24th of 2023, when they changed the law. The insurance companies were able to convince the Florida legislature to push this agenda, and they changed the law. So now we don't have pure comparative fault anymore. So if your accident happened after March 24th of 2023 and you're found to be 52% at fault for causing the crash, then you're not going to get $1. That's just the way the law is now. So that's pure comparative fault. That used to be pure comparative fault in the state, but now we have modified comparative fault or modified contributory negligence, which means that, just like I said, if you're more than 50% at fault, even by a 0.1, it could be 50.1% at fault, you get nothing. And so if you're an attorney or you're in trial, you really have to let the jury understand that if they put more than 50% at fault on your client, they're not going to get anything. The client's not going to get anything. So if they want your client to get compensation for what happened to them, they need to put under 50% at fault. So comparative negligence, in some states, you still have it. If you're 60% at fault, you still get paid 40%. In a modified contributory negligence state like we have here now in Florida, unfortunately, if you're 60% at fault, you get nothing. So that's important for your lawyer to understand. That's why it's important to always stay on top of the law, stay on top of what they're doing at the Florida legislature, because they are changing the laws, and the laws change every week on Wednesday when courts come out, the appellate courts come out with their decisions. And so they're tweaking the case law every week. So we have to stay on top of that.
Oh, yeah, that's a big change. That's good to know that for sure. All right. Well, thank you very much, Sagi, and thank you for tuning in to Road to Recovery, Advocacy and Insights for Trucking Accidents with Sagi Shaked. For more information or to connect with Sagi, visit shakedlaw.com, and be sure to like and subscribe to our channel and leave us a review. Sagi, as always, thanks so much for being here. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for having me again.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.